So look, I am no great bike mechanic, but I do love to tinker with my bikes, try out different drivetrains, shifting systems, and swap handlebars. So that means playing with tools and other knickknacks every single day. In this video, I'm going to talk about the tools I use the most and the ones I can't live without. So let's get into it. I'm going to start out with the weirdest one first. Yes, it is a turkey baster. This is something that I didn't think I would use very often, but I find myself using a ton, surprisingly. Basically, when I'm swapping tires, I use this to suck out the sealant, move it into a temporary holding container or the tire I'm going to mount next. It's a lot quicker than scooping it out with a spoon. Yes, you can use a syringe or those mini bottles of sealants to basically do the same thing, or insert any other great idea that you'll never make a video about, but I personally enjoy using the turkey baster. A little bit on the silly side, but super useful. Okay, I want to get past the super obvious ones really quickly. A bike stand is a good idea. I spent many years working on my bikes on the ground, flipping them upside down, and I have to tell you, getting a proper bike stand is a game changer. The next super obvious one is a good set of hex wrenches. I actually really like these Park Tool T-handle ones. You can use a small end and get some good leverage. It also has this bit here where if you accidentally round out the bolt head, you can still get it off. One nice thing about these ones in particular is that this end isn't a ball head. So if you're adjusting those old school brake levers, you can stick this in here, tighten it and loosen it without worrying about rounding out that bolt. In addition to those T-handles, I do also have a full set of hex wrenches as well as some T-wrenches from Silka. These ones have a ball head at the end, which is good for quickly spinning a bolt, but not what you want to use to get to final torque, because that will round out the bolt head. So I find that it's good to have both. The next obvious one is a floor pump. I have multiple floor pumps with gauges in varying levels of inaccuracy, let's say. And I also have an air compressor, which has proven to be super handy. On that air compressor, I use these two heads the most. This one is pretty standard. This one's by Presta-Cycle. I use this to inflate Presta valves, pretty self-explanatory. But I also find myself using this one a lot. And it's got a nozzle tip here. And the way I use this is to remove and install my favorite grips, the ESI silicone grips. And speaking of those grips, we do have a few left that you can pick up at our shop. They make a perfect stocking stuffer. We've got our standard dark gray / black and some more fun, colorful ones. Besides those, what else do I use pretty often? I definitely reach for my cable cutters on an almost daily basis, so worthwhile investing into a nice big Herky shop level one. Clearly, I use this to cut cables, also housing. It's kind of debatable about whether you should use this for housing, but I do, so there you go. Another tool I use often with the cable cutters is some kind of pick or awl. These are good for sticking into your cable housing and making sure it's nice and round and ready to receive the inner steel cable. This curved end is also really good, just maneuvering a brake cable into those old school brake levers, or just dealing with cables in general on STI shifters or whatever. Super handy. This one is by Feedback Sports. It came in a tool kit. I'm sure you can find something similar separately. Another tool I use pretty often is some sort of file. I use this to clean off those cuts of the housing. Yesterday, I shortened the steer tube of my hardtack here, and I use this to file down all the sharp burrs. The next tool is a Trident style quick link tool. I use this tool a ton. What's unique about this is it has a set of prongs for opening up a quick link, as well as another set to close it. It used to be with 9-speed quick links, you could do it by hand, but with 10, 11, and 12, I found that it really requires a tool to do that. Yes, you can use pedal force to lock the quick links in, but I find on a stand where it's a little bit unstable, and if the quick links are really tight, it's just so much easier and way more affirming to just use a tool and hear it click closed. With all the drivetrain hacks I do, a chain whip is essential, and I really like this style chain whip. This one again is by Feedback Sports. It came in this kit and it works pretty well. You just clamp this on to the cassette and to keep it from rotating as you undo the lock ring. And speaking of lock rings, this is a great tool for that. Again, this is by Feedback Sports. With these two tools, you can loosen and tighten your cassette. On the other side of this tool, it's keyed for the lock rings used for brake rotors and some bottom brackets, I believe. I use this a ton in the shop, but when we travel, I also put this in the travel bag because my brake rotors use this style lock ring and Laura's uses this kind, so this is an all-in-one tool that has both. Going back to tires for a second, these are two tools I use fairly often. You know, the tried and true plastic Pedro's tire lever, as well as this tire jack by Cool Stop. Occasionally I'll run into a really stiff tubeless tire that's hard to get on the rim. This prong end here basically sits on the rim. This wraps around the tire bead and you can lever it up and over. This works really well for those really stubborn tires, especially the first installations. Another tool I use pretty often is a torque wrench. I've tried multiple kinds and I really like the simplicity of these beam style wrenches. There's no need to zero them out after every use. And another big plus is you can use it to torque things down both clockwise and counterclockwise. So think your bottom bracket. I'm not sure if you can do that with the click style ones. So more often than not, I'm reaching for these beam style torque wrenches. The next one, of course, are some Knipex pliers. This one I carry with me on the bike. This one I use for home use. It's good for using nuts and bolts and works as a semi-ratchet. One nice thing about the design is that you can actually get pretty good purchase on a cable, so you can also use this as a plier. Another tool that I don't use super often, but I'm really glad I have it when I need it, is a pretty simple tap set. I have these for M4 and M5 bolts, and it comes with this little handle. I use this basically when I'm assembling a bike or installing a rack for the first time. Sometimes paint has gotten into the little screw holes, bolt holes, eyelets, that's the word I'm looking for, and this clears it out. Otherwise, if you go in there with a bolt and try to He-Man it in there, there's a good chance you might cross thread, the bolt might break. Don't ask me how I know, but this really takes the stress out of doing those things. And lastly, one other kind of weird thing I tend to use fairly often is some Sugru. I use this to build up material on things, like I use it on this shifter here, or if I want to protect a certain area for abrasion. Think of it as like three-dimensional duct tape. It's basically a putty that you can mold into different shapes. It cures in about 24 hours and it becomes fairly hard and resilient, but not permanent. You can still like scrape it off if you want. But I'm basically finding all sorts of uses for Sugru all the time. Those are the tools that I reach for on an almost daily basis. Are there any other weird tools that I left out that you guys use fairly often? Let me know in the comments below. And once again, if you enjoy the videos on the channel, please consider supporting us by joining us on Patreon. It's how we literally keep the lights on, how I run the heater, or pick up some merch from the store. And as always, keep the supple side down.